Forster wrote, "The Times took the lead in suggesting that the only fit resting place for the remains of a man so dear to England was the Abbey in which the most illustrious Englishmen are laid." With the expression thus given to a general wish, the Dean of Westminster lost no time in showing ready compliance. We know, however, from the evidence I presented, that this was patently not the case. Stanley was convinced of the necessity of getting Dickens to the Abbey long before this, perhaps even while the author was still alive. Despite this appeal's appearance in the press, Stanley's private journal records that by Monday morning, he still had not received an application from any person in authority, so he took no steps to advance his burial plan. His prayers must have seemed answered then, when Forster and Charlie Dickens appeared at the door of the deanery on that same day. According to the dean, after they sat down, Forster said to Stanley, "I imagine the article in the Times must have been written with your concurrence." Stanley replied, "No, I had no concern with it, but at the same time, I gave it privately to be understood that I would consent to the interment if it was demanded." By this, Stanley meant that he sent to Locker, which the latter had forwarded to Charlie. Stanley, of course, readily agreed to the request from Dickens' representatives for burial in Poets' Corner. What he refrains from saying is how much he personally was looking forward to officiating at an event of such national significance. While there's a substantial body of evidence concerning Stanley's motivations, the mindset and actions of Forster are harder to trace. He left few clues about his intentions, and he destroyed all of the working notes for his monumental 3-volume biography of Dickens. These tomes were informed by almost 900 letters that he'd received from the author, and in the biography we hear the inimitable's own voice coming through on every page. Unfortunately, most of these letters were destroyed, so we can't confirm whether the transcriptions were accurate or even complete. We also see a process of selective editing undertaken by Georgina Hogarth and Mamie Dickens, assisted by Wilkie Collins, in the production of their Letters of Charles Dickens, edited by his sister-in-law and his eldest daughter, published in the 1880s. When the text in this edition are compared to the manuscript letters, a few of which I myself have found, in my role as principal editor of Dickens's letters, you can see how much was excluded, particularly concerning business and personal matters, and criticism for particular individuals. The edition also cobbled together passages from letters of widely different dates. We had to wait for Walter Dexter's none such edition of Dickens's letters, published in 1938, for unexpurgated versions of correspondence to see the light of day. This points to how carefully manufactured Dickens's image was in the 19th century. John Forster, Dickens's children, his estranged wife Catherine, Ellen Ternan, the multitude of servants who worked in the household, including, interestingly, those who were dismissed, were all dedicated to preserving the immortal memory. There's evidence of the care that Forster exercised in depicting the death of Dickens. For example, in November 1873, when he was completing the 3rd volume of the biography, which featured the account of the death and funeral, he wrote on morning paper to the author's doctor, Frank Beard, to say, "I'm approaching to the close of my sorrowful task, and I have thought that you might wish to say something of the character of the last fatal illness in which you so kindly ministered to him." Forster wasn't necessarily seeking precise minute-to-minute details from Beard, but rather something of the mood and atmosphere that pervaded in the 24 hours between Dickens's collapse and his final breath, when, we should recall, Forster wasn't present. It's clear that he was devastated by the demise of Dickens, as he indicated in a letter to their mutual American friend, John Eliot Norton. He said, "Until yesterday, I have myself been little able to write. I broke down on Wednesday last and had to take to my bed, which I only left on Sunday. I was at Launceston in Cornwall, far away when the news reached me. All was not then over, but before I reached Plymouth, I knew the end had come." He had never spoken from the first attack, nor had they been able to even to move him from the dining room in which it occurred, and where I saw him on Saturday morning, with flowers strewn over him by poor dear Mary and Kate and Georgina, as I remember had been done by himself when his little Dora died. I had never seen so sweet and calm an expression on his face as when I kissed it in the coffin. Because the death as depicted in the biography needed to be impersonal, restrained, and solemn, Forster, of course, couldn't insert this level of detail, particularly as some of it, such as the kiss he gave the corpse, related to and reflected upon his intimate feelings for his friend. In the next paragraph of the letter to Norton, Forster inserted this significant detail. What you will have seen in the papers generally of the closing scene is sufficiently near the truth. This is extremely telling in terms of the way the death was handled by Forster. It was near the truth, but not quite the whole story. In his study of several prominent 19th century biographers and their subjects, entitled Truth to Life, A.O.J. Cockshut perceptibly observes, all sensitively written death scenes are a product of the tension between fact and interpretation. The most trivial remark or gesture can be endowed in the minds of onlookers with symbolic significance because it is the last. And death is at once a great mystery and a plain mundane fact with practical consequences. While Dickens's life and work have been pored over by countless biographers, his death and burial are given far more cursory treatment, partly because of the apparent scarcity of verifiable detail, and also on account of the deliberate attempt by Forster and by others to frame the public narrative in such a way as to advance as quickly as possible towards Poets' Corner. The fact that this was Forster's express wish is made clear in a letter from Stanley in June 1872. When Forster sent the Dean a copy of the first volume of his Life of Dickens, Stanley responded, "You are very good to speak so warmly of any assistance I may have rendered in carrying out your wishes and the desire of the country on the occasion of the funeral. The recollection of it will always be treasured amongst the most interesting of the various experiences which I have traversed in my official life." Here the Dean acknowledged both the role of Forster, not the Dickens family, in the plan, and highlighted the significance in his career of overseeing the final journey of Dickens's remains to what Forster called in the biography the resting place in which the most illustrious Englishmen are laid. In his manuscript recollections, penned more than 5 years after the event, Stanley recorded his version of what had transpired on the morning of the 13th of June. When Forster and Charlie appeared at the deanery, he said, "At 11 o'clock there arrived Mr. Forster, his future biographer, and his son. When they entered, Mr. Forster was at first, and also during several passages of the interview, so much overcome by the violence of his grief that he could hardly speak. Indeed, I have never seen any man so overcome by sorrow as he appeared to be on that occasion. When he'd recovered his calmness, he said, 'I imagine the article in the Times must have been written with your concurrence.' I replied, 'No, I had no concern with it. But at the same time, I had given it privately to be understood that I would consent to the interment if it was demanded.' The letter, it seems, had gone astray, and therefore it was only on this expression of public feeling in the Times that they had ventured to apply. I said, 'After this expression in the Times, of course, all further application is unnecessary, and I at once consent.'"